Well, joining me now this evening to discuss this further is Mr. Botsang Moila, political analyst, who joins me in studio, as well as Dewa Mavinga, Southern Africa Director with the African Division at Human Rights Watch, also joins me in studio. We've got Mr. Marinus Wishes, a constitutional lawyer via OBI, and Matthew Cannock, the spokesperson of Amnesty International Centre for International Justice, joins us via Skype. I want to welcome all of our guests this evening. Good evening to our guests here in studio. Dewa, let me start with you. Your reaction to this ruling by the ICC.
Well, the ICC has confirmed what we have known for a while, that South Africa violated the Rome Statute of the ICC when it failed to arrest Omar al-Bashir during his visit to South Africa in June 2015. And this also confirms the findings of South Africa's own domestic courts, that indeed South Africa had international legal obligations to arrest Omar al-Bashir on 2 international arrest warrants on crimes of genocide, war crimes in the Darfur that resulted in the killings of several hundreds of thousands of people. So this is something that is supportive of global justice and the justice for the victims of the war crimes and genocide in Darfur. And it also reaffirms that South Africa still has an opportunity to stand with international justice and also with victims of Omar al-Bashir's alleged crimes in Darfur.
Dewa, you speak of the Rome Statute. Just expand on that a little bit and help our viewers and myself to understand this a little bit better.
Well, the Rome Statute is the founding international convention that set up the International Criminal Court, and South Africa has ratified it and is a member and has domesticated the Rome Statute in terms of its own domestic laws. So it means that in terms of global justice, this is the court of last resort where domestic or regional courts are unable to dispense justice. And South Africa is fully party to that statute and therefore has got the obligations which the court has today found following the hearings on April 7, that indeed South Africa had failed in its duties in terms of the Rome Statute that founds the ICC when South Africa failed to arrest Omar al-Bashir when he was on South African soil and territory in 2015.
Botsang, let me come to you. Your initial reaction having heard the ruling by the ICC.
Well, good evening to you, Abigail, and good evening to my fellow panelists and the ANN7 viewers. My reaction to the ICC decision, as well as the Constitutional Court or the legal court in South Africa, didn't surprise me. And the only reason why I'm not surprised is exactly what he had explained, to say South Africa is a signatory to an international treaty, an international convention which is governed by a diplomatic process as well as international laws. You know, being from the diplomatic ground, I can relate to that kind of situation. But I must say is that the government in South Africa, they saw this coming. They should have expected that the ICC as well as our local courts will rule in favor of the ICC merely because for a country to sign international treaties, it just doesn't go and sign and become a member of international treaties. We've got quite a number that we have signed as a country. But that process in South Africa, fortunately, it goes through parliamentary processes, it goes through domestic processes before DIRCO can become the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, before it can become representing the country, being a member of the treaty. We did expect it. We did expect that courts and justices will go and rule in the favor of the ICC. However, I must say, it has happened several times, Abigail, in the world that signatories of international treaties, they depart from what they have agreed to. And for various reasons. You look at circumstances that prevailed during that time. Many African states have actually withdrawn from the ICC. And they didn't even follow procedure from withdrawing because of the circumstances. I don't say it is correct to withdraw and not abide to the rules of a treaty that you have signed to. We must remember the situation of Zimbabwe. We must remember the situation of Libya and Palestine in this instance. I think personally I am happy that the African National Congress during their policy conference, they have actually emphasized or re-emphasized the fact that the country as South Africa must relook at their role and responsibility or activity into the ICC. I've said it before, you know, last year around when President Omar was here, I've said that the only problem with the ICC is it looks like its intention is to punish, prosecute, and charge and jail African leaders. You know, nothing has happened when the George W. Bush and other Western countries' leaders have committed acts of homicide, acts of, you know, murder and so forth all over the world. They've done it in Libya, they've done it in Iraq, and all over the world. And that should not be our core to belong to an international organization. I am not putting a blind eye that atrocities of genocide and murder has happened in that country. I'm not saying that, but we cannot sit here, and that's why I differ with him. We cannot sit here as a nation or as people and say President Omar is guilty of those genocide atrocities, because he has never been tested in any court of law and found guilty to have been responsible for that, as much as he was the head of state. But what South Africa had done was that the ICC has conducted itself in a manner that is anti-African leaders who are not pro-Western countries. And I think South Africa must relook at its position in the ICC. What the courts have decided, unfortunately, it is within the legal parameters and we cannot reverse that. But the country should relook at its membership of the ICC and many other conventions that we have signed as a country, which are actually of detriment to us as the member of SADC, as the member of and the leader of the African Union as a country. We should really look at that situation. Our priority should be firstly African, before we can satisfy the needs of the Western and the other foreign countries. And that's my view.
Dewa, do you want to comment to what Botsang has said in the spaces where he differs to your comments?
Yes, and to explain further, to say,
Sure.
South Africa is not a seriously rights-abusing country, and therefore has nothing to fear. In fact, what South Africa is doing and had done by purporting to withdraw from the ICC without following its own domestic laws was to send a wrong message that it stands in solidarity with abusers, with people accused of grave crimes. And we have not said, and no one has said, South Africa should have labeled Omar al-Bashir guilty. But South Africa should simply have acted in accordance with the ICC requirements to arrest and hand over Omar al-Bashir to the ICC for trial and due process. And that has not happened. And so now there is a perception that perhaps South Africa is sliding towards moving away from global justice. And actually, South Africa is the outlier here, is the only country on the African continent. Forget about Burundi, because Burundi really is trying to run away from justice. But for South Africa, there is really no justification for such a powerful country to do away with its moral high ground simply to protect Omar al-Bashir. If you look at the Gambia, the only other country that had withdrawn, it has cancelled that and has gone back to the ICC in support of global justice. Yes, the global geopolitics are not level. So you have powerful countries like the US protecting their own, and Russia and China perhaps not doing referrals. And perhaps there has a sense that the previous prosecutions have mainly focused on Africa. But we need to put that in context, that it was actually African states themselves in the main who requested the ICC to intervene in their own situations. And this is the case with Kenya, with Uganda, with the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the Central African Republic. So we need to put things in perspective and say South Africa has an opportunity to show moral leadership, and there is nothing to fear by being a faithful member of the ICC, and that there is scope within the ICC to push for reforms that South Africa might desire in other countries. So we are saying, yes, the ICC is not perfect, but the way to go about it is to push for reforms within the framework of respect for global justice.
You know, my brother here is talking about pushing for reforms within the ICC. You cannot push for a reform in an institution that has shown and demonstrated inequality. And this whole thing, when you look at it, and I appreciate the fact that he is raising an issue that Africa itself is the ones, or African states are the ones who went to the ICC. They were not dragged into the ICC. But when you have entered into a marriage and you realize that this marriage is not working, you step out, you move out of that marriage under whatever circumstances.
Hopefully
now,
so.
Yes, but now, he has mentioned Gambia, he has mentioned Burundi and so forth. What is very funny about this whole ICC process is that if you look at it, it's torn across the color line. It's torn across the racial line. If Africa and South Africa is being seen as a model of human rights and a constitutional democracy in the world which the ICC endorses, how come that atrocities of this country of apartheid, the murderers of apartheid, where people were killed in this country, not in 1960, not in 1976, not in 1985, and not even in 2013 under the current government when people were massacred in Marikana. How come the ICC is silent about all those murderers and atrocities? Because they were committed by white people, because they were committed by Western European countries, because during the era of apartheid, Europe, particularly Britain or England, as well as America, they were supporting these elements of murdering, African people in South Africa. How come to date, no single person from the Republic of South Africa has been charged and or prosecuted by the ICC to face genocide? And that's where my problem is, to say the ANC made the biggest mistake as the leading party in government by signing into this treaty out of excitement, by becoming a respected country that has good human rights record. But there is no good human rights record in South Africa when there's been atrocities of human rights against the black majority African people in this country. So when it's black people who are being killed by white foreign people in South Africa, then it's not human rights. Then everybody's silent about it. People were murdered in this country by the apartheid when the ICC was existing. Black people, only black people were murdered in Marikana in 2013. What did the ICC do? They were silent. They've never even issued a statement in that regard. So the problem that I have with the ICC is when it's Black Lives Matter murdered by white people, then it's okay. But when it's black people killing black people, and or leaders are said, like President Omar is said to have been behind the genocide in his country, and we all know that America, Britain, and all these other countries have been involved in wars in Africa. They have funded, they have given arms to all these people who are committing these genocides and atrocities in the continent. And the ICC is not taking into consideration that process.
Let's get another view coming through this evening. We are joined via Skype, like I said earlier, by Matthew Cannock, spokesperson of Amnesty International Centre for International Justice. Good evening to you, Matthew. Thank you for joining us here on ANN7. Your reaction to the ruling by the ICC?
Well, our reaction of Amnesty International is frankly that we didn't hear anything new today and nothing that we didn't already know, and frankly speaking, nothing that the South African government didn't already know. It knew that it had to arrest Omar al-Bashir when he set foot on the territory. That was confirmed, as we know, all the way up to the Supreme Court in South Africa. It was confirmed again today by the ICC chamber. So in many respects, we didn't hear anything that we didn't already know. But I think really what's important is that this decision is now taken by all states parties, not just in the African region, but all over the world, as notice that now if al-Bashir sets foot on their territory, they have to arrest him. And we really should be looking forward now after this decision.
Matthew, you did mention, like the two guests in my studio, that this is something that's been expected. This is nothing new. But are there any repercussions? Does anything different happen now going forward besides what you've already mentioned regarding Bashir stepping onto a specific territory and being arrested? Are there any further consequences in this regard?
In relation to South Africa, well, the decision today said that actually the court wouldn't refer the matter either to the UN Security Council or to the Assembly of States Parties to the International Criminal Court. So in that regard, I don't think too much will happen going forward. As I said, what I sincerely hope will happen going forward within South Africa and within the South African government is that the government will recognise now that it was in the wrong and will firmly firmly state its position that it would not anymore welcome President al-Bashir on its territory. And as I said, for all the other states parties, let's not forget that Jordan, for example, didn't arrest Omar al-Bashir recently when he set foot in Jordan. And we hope that they will also take note of this ruling, and we'll see what happens going forward.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Just stay with us. Botsang, I want to come to you. And something that was mentioned at the ANC National Policy Conference over the last week, the ANC stating that they would still like to leave the ICC. Does this decision have any impact on decisions of that nature?
Well, Abigail, like the first speaker had said, you know, this will not have an impact. The decision of the ICC at the moment will not have an impact. South Africa should have arrested President Omar, and they did not. So nothing's going to happen. But the decision of the ruling party to endorse the fact that the country has been talking about, and they are the ruling party, has been talking about withdrawing from the ICC. Yes. I think it's going to only receive opposition from, you know, parties like the Democratic Alliance in Parliament, who will be outvoted. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that's how the democratic process works. I think the majority of political parties in South Africa, they're not happy about the way the ICC has been conducting itself, and I see them supporting the ruling party in withdrawing from the ICC. What the ANC or the government of South Africa should be doing at the moment is to withdraw. There's a very important international body, you know, which is within the Den Hague Statutes and the Vienna Convention. It's well within the ambits of the diplomatic corps. However, what South Africa is supposed to be doing at the moment is to withdraw from the ICC, and when they go back into the ICC, because some of the superpowers or the big countries of the world, they are not members of the ICC, and you should ask yourself why. South Africa should withdraw from this, and when in going back into the ICC, they should set the terms and conditions of how the ICC should conduct itself. That's one. Two, South Africa must not go back into the ICC in isolation. We are a state that belongs to the Southern African Customs Union, SACU. We belong to the Southern African Development Community, the SADC, and we are members of the African Union. So in going back, whatever year would it be, we should go back with the condition that we come as an African country. And therefore, the conditions must be set to say how the ICC should be institutionalized, who are the people who are prosecutors and all that in the ICC, and how the ICC should conduct itself in looking at, you know, acts of genocide and so forth, in prosecuting state leaders. I mean, I've said earlier today, why can't the ICC charge George W. Bush for murdering people in Iraq? How come the ICC doesn't charge Israel for murdering the children and women and defenseless people in Palestine? And on that ground, we should actually withdraw as a nation. And I think the ANC is on the right track in this instance.
A lot of unanswered questions there. Dewa, let me come back to you, and let's expand a little bit on South Africa's reason for not arresting Omar al-Bashir when he was in the country during that summit. There was something with regards to immunity. Was that valid? Just talk us through that situation, please.
Well, yes, one of the main reasons put forward by the South African government when it purportedly withdrew from the ICC at the first instance was that there was a conflict of obligations, because in terms of diplomatic laws, it wished to grant President Omar al-Bashir immunity while on South African soil attending an African Union summit. And therefore, the South African government had chosen to go with diplomatic immunity for a sitting head of state. But the fundamental aspect of the ICC in the Rome Statute is that it does not grant immunity for grave crimes like war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression. And therefore, this ruling today also clarified that to say there is no immunity for a sitting head of state, and therefore South Africa had no legal basis for failing to comply with the ICC obligations when it did not act on Omar al-Bashir. And this actually is at the heart of the discourse, to say that South Africa should not sacrifice, its high moral ground simply to proffer solidarity and immunity to Omar al-Bashir, because there is scope for South Africa to continue to conduct its peace building and conflict resolution work without violating its commitments under the ICC. And South Africa as a country individually enters into these international obligations and withdraws individually, but it needs to look at the broader interests and say, at the moment, what is in the best interest in terms of justice for the people of South Africa. And it would appear to me that such a consideration would be in favor of remaining in the ICC and using the different avenues within the ICC to push for reforms.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we have run out of time. Botsang, I know you wanted to add one or two more things there, but next time, I do promise. Thank you very much to all of our guests for joining us this evening with regards to this discussion. That was Botsang Moila, political analyst, as well as Dewa Mavinga, Southern Africa Director with the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch. And joining us via Skype was with Mr. Matthew Cannock, spokesperson for Amnesty International Center for International Justice. But that's a wrap up of Newsroom Live for this evening. From myself, Abigail Fasahi, and the team, thank you very much for tuning in. ANN 7 Prime is up next with my colleague Cindy Mabi. Enjoy and good night.